So, Chris, we're talking about Star Fox 64 today, but I
Yeah.
actually, to kind of kick us off and get us in the Star Fox spirit, played the original Star Fox for the SNES and the confusing, developed for the SNES but
Hmm.
not released on the SNES Star Fox 2. So I thought we could talk about that to kind of kick us off a little bit.
Okay.
Just touching on it. We're not going to do full reviews or anything. But I did see that the original Star Fox was Nintendo's second 3D game and the first game to use polygonal or polygonal
Hmm.
graphics.
Oh,
And that required a special,
the
kind of
FX
like
chip.
Super FX chip to be
Yeah.
added to the SNES cartridge just to
Yeah.
make it possible. And it was really cool looking for the age.
Yeah.
It's a little dated nowadays, but it was super cool to be, in a spacecraft, very much modeled after the Star Wars X-wing,
Hmm.
and flying around saving the universe, as it were. Um, I did notice that an interesting thing about emulation, I haven't dug into why this is, but it made sense back on the SNES. We have this new chip that allows us to render polygon 3D graphics, but it's still like stressing the system. So the frame rate of the original Star Fox isn't that great. It's like
Yeah.
maybe 15 to 20 on average, sometimes slowing down a little extra. So it feels a little jarring at times. It's perfectly playable, but a little distracting. But when they emulate it to the Switch, that's still there, and I'd like to
Hmm.
at some point dive into why that is. Is it like, the Switch obviously has a lot more power than the SNES, but is it saying like only use 4 MB of RAM or something like that because that's all it knows how to use or something.
Well,
Um,
the other guess is just a rendering problem too. I mean, I know it's supposed to be real time rendering for stuff, but the
yeah,
way, yeah, the way even some things gets across, I don't know. It could be
yeah,
that too. Yeah.
it's a little confusing. You would think the Switch is powerful enough, but
Yeah.
also maybe that would require a lot of reprogramming to get the game to use all that power. Um, but it's still fun. And the Star Fox games, all of them, are very much influenced by like that bullet hell R-type like space shooter.
Hmm.
You're on rails, you're dodging enemy fire, you're shooting back, and you're just trying to survive. But rather than a top-down perspective of the R-type, you're going to kind of an over-the-shoulder or a first-person cockpit perspective as you
Yeah.
move through space and dodge bullets, and that was really fun. I do think that this game, like I said, is heavily inspired by Star Wars and other space-based movies.
Yep.
You almost can feel yourself flying through the Death Star trench as Luke Skywalker, and you got the banter like between Luke and all the other pilots talking. You've got banter in between Star Fox, Fox McCloud and let's see, it's Peppy, Slippy, and Falco are
Yeah.
his little squadron, um, and they're collectively known as a mercenary group called Star Fox, which is very much a Fox McCloud is kind of like the diva of this boy band of pilots, and
Well,
named it after himself.
oh, I guess I can see what you mean with that. I was going to say Falco's kind of the diva,
Oh
comes
yeah,
across
yeah.
as that, but
In other ways, Falco
yeah,
is very much the attention person.
I, I, I'm reminded to we're talking about the SNES one to the 64. Not to jump to the 64, but the voices in Super Nintendo Star
Right.
Fox games. I'm gonna try not to get into the 64 ones, but because they both have memorable voices, but I think the SNES one even more because they're not so much actual voices. It's like weird sound effects coming from all of
Yeah.
them because it was like I who had the like the deep one, like it might have been Falcon. It's like "Roar, roar, roar, roar," like it was
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah. And like beep 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 or
yeah,
something like that, almost
it was
Morse
Slippy.
code-ish. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
It's kind of funny. And then they voiced it over properly for 64 with actual voice lines.
yeah.
The SNES days, you had to read while a million bullets were flying at you, lasers were firing at
But
you.
you'd be notified with like "Roar, roar, 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 roar." And you're like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, that's what's his name talking. Okay,
So I think I gave Star Fox like one thumb up. It's a classic, worth checking out. Some visual limitations held it back a little.
Yeah.
And then I think also what contributed to only one thumb up for me was that Star Fox 64 is so much better. It took all that Star Fox did and improved on it. And it only came out 4 years later, which is kind of impressive.
Oh, yeah.
It
Well,
was
and
93 for Star Fox and 97 for Star Fox 64.
yeah, it's been a while even on playing Star Fox 1 on Nintendo Switch, but I remember going to it and it was I mean this is well before we talked about doing this whole series of the retro games and stuff. And so playing it on Nintendo Switch, I had high expectations because I loved the first one so much, and then playing it I'm like, "Oh gosh, I might not have even done well when it was on the SNES." Like
Yeah.
it was tough, but it wasn't tough because it was just a tough game. It was tough because of exactly what you're saying. Like sometimes the frame rates wouldn't be that great. Sometimes the controls were a little sticky for some stuff. It just, yeah, it was a little hard to go through. I remember only beating it once ever, I think. So,
Um, I did play Star Fox. I know I got to the end boss. I can't remember if I beat it when I was replaying it, but it is a tricky game. And then, of
hmm
course, that was on the easy path. There's also a normal and a hard
hmm
difficulty with different levels that I don't know if I've ever beaten ever, ever, ever.
yeah. I mean, there's
Uh,
some special ending stuff if you beat it on some of the other levels I remember, but yeah.
And then Star Fox 2 has a really interesting story that I definitely wanted to touch
Yes,
on.
please share.
Um, it was a game that was developed for the SNES and it was supposed to come out in 1995, 2 years after Star Fox 1 and two
Okay.
years before Star Fox 64. Um, but just as it was almost completed, I think I saw it was like 95% completed,
hmm
they decided to cancel the game because the graphics were too dated compared to
Mm,
the PlayStation that came out in 1994, the year before. And so they didn't think it would sell very well because it's old tech versus a completely new generation. So they
hmm
pivoted to Star Fox 64 to
Hmm.
have a much better visual presentation. However, despite being canceled, Nintendo had them finish the game, including debugging and localization, and then took the complete package and just archived it away for, let's see, 22 years. Star Fox 64, I always thought Star Fox 2, excuse me, came out in Japan and just never made it to the States.
I
In
thought so
fact,
too.
it didn't come out anywhere. It
Oh,
came out originally on the Super Nintendo, yeah, Super Nintendo Classic, the little
yeah.
tiny Super Nintendo that had a bunch of games
Oh,
preloaded on it in
yes.
2017, and that was the
Yes.
first time it was released anywhere, other than I think there was a leaked copy that got out at one point. Um, but just a really interesting story about this game being canceled, and then they decided to finish it anyway, and then eventually released it down the road. And it did some really interesting things that didn't work, but were really promising from a uh, conceptual point.
Okay.
You kind of picture a map, a space map with you on the bottom left and the enemies, Andros and all the other enemies on the upper right with, planets and space spaces in between dotting the map. And there was this kind of semi-real-time section where you would have, missiles being fired from enemy forces toward allied forces, and there would be enemy pilots moving around the map, and you'd have to choose what you did. Would you
Huh.
try to fly and intercept a missile? Would you go take out that enemy pilot that's attacking your base? Would you go try to capture an enemy base or defend an allied base? And you would have to make these decisions and move across the map, and then you would enter into kind of a short level, only a few minutes long, but you would then play out that level of either entering a base or fighting off an enemy pilot, whatever you decided to do. And like, oh, that's really novel in this kind of like real time, it's different every time you play
Yeah.
experience, except for the fact that each mission type was just rinse and repeat. So
Okay.
you're going to go attack the enemy base. Okay, you're going to fly at the enemy base. You're going to transform into this mecha looking thing. You're going to infiltrate and destroy the core, and you did it. You stop the enemy base. And then go back to the map, make another decision. Oh, I'm going to go capture that enemy base now. It's the exact same mission,
Okay.
basically. each time, and
Like with
the
different
same with when you fought.
graphics, kind of, or something like
No,
that.
not really.
Oh,
Like visually, it looked about the same. It
oh,
played about the same. It was
okay.
just the same mission over and over again. And it was
Okay.
different if you chose to fight an enemy pilot, but each time you fought an enemy pilot, it would be about the same time as any other time you fought an enemy
Hmm.
pilot. So that was kind of disappointing to have this really cool concept that was kind of ruined by just being the same thing over and over again.
Yeah.
So I didn't go
Eh.
very far in that one once I realized that. I was like, okay, I experienced it. I think there were multiple reasons this game probably should have been released, but hey, at least it's here now.
Yeah.
Uh, it was interesting. I play Star Fox Water 64 instead.
Two brothers play a game. Two brothers play a game. Two brothers play a game. Then they will rate that game.
So
Yeah.
after like a good 15 minutes of already talking about video games, welcome to Two Brothers Play a Game. I'm Josh,
I'm Chris.
and this is a confusing podcast, honestly. You may have noticed there's a little gap in our podcast episodes.
Oh,
Chris
yes.
is going
Yeah.
through a very complicated move, very long, complicated move,
Yes. Plus the
and so that
holidays.
plus the
Plus a trip.
holidays. And all sorts of things were going on, so we
Yeah.
weren't able to record. And then coming up, my wife and I are having our first kid, which is going to be
Yeah.
another complicated
You will
time
not
to
just
record.
be a brother, but a dad as well.
Yes, I will get a new hat, the dad hat. I will hopefully gain some wisdom throughout this process, but largely I will probably just be more tired.
Yeah,
But we
that's what
will
I've
be
heard.
coming back with our old style episodes talking about Nintendo Switch games we got on sale probably in the summer. We're going to
Mm,
hopefully have something in
maybe
the
maybe
feed
early summer.
between now and then, maybe
Yeah,
sooner. Who knows? Who
yeah,
knows? You might start hearing crying in the background. Oh, hopefully not too much. It might be me.
yeah.
It's very possible it could be
Let's have baby girl on.
me.
She probably won't be able to speak, but hey, uh,
Yes, could be cute.
yeah.
Before we take another break after the last couple holiday break, we are going to finish up our Nintendo Switch Online Expansion Pass library experience that we've been going through over the last year and change.
Is that the official
Uh,
title? I didn't realize that
uh,
was the full official title.
oh, Nintendo Switch Online Expansion Pass? Yes,
No, no,
that
no,
is.
no, no, no. For our segment, the Nintendo. Okay, what was it?
I
Nintendo
said the
Switch
Nintendo Switch
Online
Online Expansion
Expansion
Pass
Pass
library. Maybe I tossed an
Experience.
experience in there. Yeah.
Yes.
So we are going to talk about Star Fox 64 and
Hmm.
about the our overall opinions of the Nintendo Switch Online Expansion Pass library experience. Added a couple extra
60,
words.
64. I
Six.
don't know why. I just feel like it needs that number added to it as well. Why
Agreed.
not?
Agreed. So thank you for joining us over this last year. It was fun. We will be back to our normal, regularly scheduled programming in the near future.
Hmm.
And we have some game recommendations for you in the meantime. First and foremost, of course, being Chrono Trigger.
Oh yeah.
But
There's
let's talk
always room
about
for
Star
Chrono
Fox
Trigger.
64. We
Yeah.
always talk about Chrono Trigger. Let's talk about something else.
Yeah.
So how would you describe Star Fox 64, Chris?
Oh, it is a I mean you kind of I'm forgetting what you call it, but the R type?
R-Type,
Yeah.
uh, bullet hell, space shooter.
It's a shooter, but it's exactly what you're saying. It's a space shooter, which I feel like has become a bit of a genre too. Um a lot of kind of dogfight type stuff. Actually, that is one thing. So it's an R type shooter, but they did introduce an element of like a dogfight too.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of a hybrid maybe. Um, and you are playing as Fox McCloud. You are on missions to save the galaxy and against the evil Andros, who is an evil also animal bad guy. And you
Yes,
yeah,
everyone in this world is some sort of
yeah.
animal species, humanoid animal species. talking
This,
humanoid animal species.
which this did introduce, I was almost going to mention when we were talking about Star Fox 1 and 2. I mean, a lot of people probably know the characters from Smash Brothers. That this was these were the games that introduced Fox McCloud, Falco, and then Star Wolf has become a a mainstay
Oh,
of Smash
that's
Brothers. And
playable as well.
yeah,
In
he has been, or Wolf, not Star Wolf. I guess it's just Wolf. No, it is Star Wolf,
yeah,
isn't it?
I think Star Wolf is the name of the
Of
team,
theirs.
similar to Star Fox,
Yeah,
and I think Wolf something or other is the character's name
yeah.
that is opposite Fox McCloud.
So Wolf, yeah, Wolf became a playable character. Gosh, which Smash? It was, I think, Wii U. The which
Oh,
is I cannot remember sometimes. The most recent one's been Ultimate, right? Smash Brothers Ultimate, which I know I'm going on a tangent, but I'm going to say it real quick. I don't know where you go from there. There's a new Switch coming out soon. What Smash Brothers game are you going to call like Smash Brothers? Like if they go to Eternal, where do you
that
go
would
from
be
there after
funny.
that?
See, I think they should go Smash Brothers Penultimate and have it be a prequel to Ultimate.
All right, fair enough. I'm
Um,
fine with that. But anyway, sorry. So Wolf, well, Wolf was in. Is that's not Melee? Was it Melee for Wii U? I'm
oh
digressing
goodness,
again.
I did not play a ton of Smash Brothers after the
Brawl.
original and Melee, which was the GameCube.
Melee was
Uh,
GameCube. That's
yeah,
right. And then Brawl was Wii U. So
that
Brawl,
sounds.
I'm pretty sure that was Wii U. Anyway, whatever one for Wii U, I know had Wolf in it, and then now they have him in Ultimate as well. So that took a while to get to that point, but we got to it. So Wolf was introduced in Star Fox 64. The
So
end.
yes. So back to describing Star Fox 64 after a little tangent. Let's see, we so it's an on-rails 3D shooter. We talked a bit about that, and then one of the interesting differences between Star Fox 1 and 64 is kind of like you were saying, they added these 3D kind of free roaming areas as well as the on rails areas
Mhm.
that weren't in Star Fox 1. They actually did have free roaming in Star Fox 2, but again,
Hmm.
not very good.
Okay.
Um, Honestly, I don't think it was very good in 64 either. I prefer the on rails levels myself.
Well, yeah, and it was. I mean, 64. That was a. I think that was a big leap for a lot of consoles,
Yeah,
though,
yeah.
to have that. So yeah.
Definitely the impressive technology needed to make that even possible. I don't I think they wanted it in Star Fox 1, but they couldn't
Hmm.
because they weren't capable of rendering that. Um, other thing I was going to say about this difference in Star Fox 1, you had the easy, medium, and hard paths with different levels on it. In Star Fox
Yes.
64, you actually uh, made decisions or kind of had sub objectives in each level that would
Hmm.
determine which path you took. So each game could be a little different because you succeeded at saving Falco or Peppy in an encounter versus you failed to save them and they got shot down, and had to go repair their ship effectively, or you succeeded at stopping the enemy fighters from destroying the base, or you failed and the base got destroyed. And that would determine the path you took through the game. In either case, as long as you stayed alive to the end, you moved on to the next level and continued. But you could potentially have a different experience by learning these different ways of changing the path through the game, which was a nice change. I really
Hmm.
liked it. I tried to do some of the ones that were in my memory, and I failed in each regard. So
Yeah.
I took the easy path all the way through Star Fox 64 because I could not succeed or
I would.
forgot how to do
Yeah, I really honestly didn't get too far because I was trying a little bit of that at first. But I was failing, and even still, I actually like died once uh in the base part and had to keep doing it. And it was actually a little bit difficult for me
it. Yeah,
to get. Yeah, which was
I do
surprising
think
because I
these are pretty
knew
challenging games.
what's that.
I
I,
do agree, these are pretty challenging games.
yeah, it surprised me actually the because and I think too the big thing, and this was for Star Fox on SNES and on 64. I wouldn't say there's an exact pattern, but I think I would get myself into a certain pattern. So like because there's no save function for any of these games, you know, like you had to start from square one each time. They weren't super long levels, but I remember I would play like the first couple levels so much. I knew what was coming, so I knew exactly like where to maneuver to do whatever I was trying to do, and got into a pattern that way. And I know I had one for that base level. Like there was some things that I would do that would get me to save the base, but all of that has been lost over time. So
Yeah.
none of it I was able to do at any of the levels, which was I was a little disappointed with. Like I knew the outcomes that I wanted because I've seen them and I've done them, and I could
Mhm.
not for the life of me do them this time. So
There's one, I think it's in the asteroid field levels. I was like,
mhm.
oh, I remember why that ring looks different.
Yeah,
Because if I fly through that ring and the next five in sequence without missing any of them, then I go like to warp speed and I end up at a different level.
yeah,
I was like, oh, I'm gonna try to do that, except I missed.
yep,
Like, 'cause you're getting shot at, a lot of things are happening, and to try to spot and get to the rings over and over again was uh, challenging.
yeah.
Um, I do like that, and kind of jumping ahead a little bit. I do think that part of the fun of Star Fox is, with a bit of practice, you can get through the game on easy, but then there's another level of getting through it on the medium and hard difficulties where the game is different. It's not just they
Hmm.
shoot you and you take more damage. Uh, uh, Normal sort of difficulty increase. It's the game. The levels are different,
Hmm.
and they're more challenging for that reason. And that's something that I think adds a lot of depth to this game. In the past, this is probably one of the games I have beaten the most of all the games I played in my life,
Hmm.
because I got it down.
Oh,
I could probably beat Star Fox 64 in like 2 hours or something like that,
yeah.
and
I can
play it
see
from
that.
start to finish.
Yeah,
And obviously, those skills are gone now and probably will
yeah.
never return. But it was fun getting to that level of kind of expertise over this game, and being able to take the hard path and beat the challenges that way. Let's touch on presentation. What do you think of the look, sound, and any other presentation parts of Star Fox 64?
You know, I enjoyed the simplicity of it for it being an older game.
Hmm.
It it had some good renderings, and I think in its favor, and this happened with the SNES, the design of the ships lends itself to the lower graphics because you just don't need a lot, and you can tell um, what they are and their builds, and they still have like a cool look to them. Like even in their simplest of graphics, it has like a really cool look to them. So I think presentation wise, that the design of the characters and the ships and all of that, I seeing it again. I think there was something to it that was just a some brilliant choices. I think with it, I really enjoyed. I actually enjoyed the cutscenes of it too. Like there was one that I'm like, this is actually kind of a nice cutscene in ways, or like how they're doing it was the it was at the asteroid field. There was the big ship, the overall like carrier of all
Oh
the
yeah,
whole Star
yeah.
Fox crew, and it's going through the asteroid field and it's shooting some asteroids, and then other ones like are hitting it, but it's like hitting it. They did a good like cutscene of for being an N64 game of like you get the impression of this is a carrier, this is a tank,
Hmm.
and then everyone's in it and they keep being deployed, and you know here's the mission kind of thing, and I just think that they did a great job at that presentation. I'm gonna keep going a little bit, and this is probably gonna bring something out. I think the enemies were hard to tell what the details were. It wasn't hard to see where the enemies were at, but I couldn't tell you what their designs exactly were, and maybe that's kind of the the downfall of the simpler graphics is they're kind of blobs sometimes, in my opinion. But yeah,
I I personally was a big fan of the enemy design
mm,
in this one. I do think Definitely the original Star Fox 1 had some confusing polygons that were okay. I guess that's a polygon enemy ship. Okay, shoot it.
Yeah.
And but with 64, I feel like they added a bit more organic elements, kind of playing with the idea that these are a bunch of different type of humanoid speaking animals,
Hmm.
playing with the idea that there were spaceships that kind of look like snakes, and there were spaceships that look like butterflies,
Hmm.
and just having kind of a variety of colorful enemies. I thought the use of color in this game was very good, and kind of just
Yeah.
bright engaging visuals. Um, I also liked the way the level designs were also unique. You know, it's not like kind of like in Star Wars, you're largely the space combat at least takes place in space, the
Hmm.
vacuum of space against other ships. This game, you know, we still have spaceships, but sometimes they're on desert planets, lava planets, water that you can get a submarine and go into a water level at one point, or a tank across a battlefield, as well as the space, the variety asteroid field
Hmm.
space, kind of interesting things flying at you as you navigate your way through. Um, I did enjoy that variety quite a lot. To me, this game is kind of peak N64 era. Like,
Hmm.
yes, it doesn't hold up as well compared to modern games, but I think this is kind of like the peak of what the N64 was capable of, and they did it really well. And the frame rate was a lot better than the original
Hmm.
Star Fox One. For the most part, you don't see a ton of slowdown or frame rate dips, even though you have a lot going on screen. I also really love the sound design, the
Hmm.
blasters and the way you kind of deflect lasers by doing a barrel roll. Uh, really captured my attention and
Hmm.
did kind of feed into that nostalgia loop of I remember these sounds. I want to power up my blasters because they sound a little bit cooler when you get them
Yeah.
to double green and double blue and things like that. So I was pretty pleased with it overall.
And I think music too. The music's always been memorable to me as well. That I think they did a great job at the design of all the scores for it too. So.
Yeah, I think it's the asteroid level. It has kind of a mysterious component to it as
Hmm.
you are exploring, and you're like, you know, it's quiet, it's too quiet, and then the enemy unleashes a trap, and the music picks up a little bit, and it's got space to it, it's got mystery, it's got ambush communicated through the music, which is really quite engaging. I definitely listened to the soundtrack growing up, even when I wasn't playing.
Yeah.
Uh, so we've already been touching on gameplay a bit. Any other highlights from the gameplay you want to talk about?
Um. Actually, highlights. I it was a lot easier to pick up again compared to some of the other games that we played
Mhm.
that were on the 64 because again it's that weird thing of the 64 controls had the one joystick and a
Mhm.
very different way that you'd hold things.
Mhm.
This worked in translation to the Nintendo Switch, or it worked enough that it wasn't. I still had some problems with it, but it was a lot easier to just jump into it than a lot of the other ones that we've done. So that somehow translated well, which brings up the mystery of like why some of the other ones didn't translate as well because it uses the same, you know, controllers basically. So, but yeah, I thought that worked out well. So,
This was a fairly minor complaint, but it kind of against what you're saying about the controllers. So in the original N64 controller, there was only one trigger. It was the Z
mm-hmm.
button in the middle joystick, and then there was also a left and a right joy controller like grip. So there was three grips for your two hands on the N64 controllers, and the outer grips had a right and a left bumper, and the middle grip had a single trigger. So there was no bumper triggers on either side of the controller. And then when they translated that to the Switch, where you have bumpers and triggers on both sides, uh, to spin right, you hit the right bumper just like you did in the N64, and to spin left, you hit the left trigger.
Yeah.
And it was just like, Why
That took
didn't
me a
we
bit.
make that tiny little control change?
Yeah,
The tiniest control change to make it either both triggers or both bumpers. It's it, I get that
yeah.
we're just translating button to button from the N64, but like, could we have not done a little bit of control
I mean,
adjustments because it was nonsense before and now it makes even less sense?
and there's a thought that I have. I might need you to remind me when we get into something after Star Fox 64 in
Uh-huh.
some reviews, but I have a thought that they could have done differently with all that too. But I'm with you. That took a minute for me to figure out. Was wait a minute, this is not quite that intuitive, but at least it was in like the same area where like
Right.
some of the other games though like wouldn't even put it in the same area, and I'm like, I have no idea where this is at. Why is it in a completely different area of these controllers than it should be from each
Yeah,
other? Like,
translating the C buttons was a little bit confusing on the
yeah,
N64 games.
yeah,
The original controller had an A and a B button, and then it had a cluster of four C buttons.
mm-hmm,
So you had six buttons on the right side of the controller, and now on the Switch you have four buttons. So you need to put those extra buttons somewhere else, which is
mm-hmm,
just gets a little weird.
a little bit, yeah.
Um, so let's see. The one other thing I wanted to talk about was the bosses at the end of the levels and the gameplay area, because I really found that that's something they kind of continued from Star Fox 1,
Mm-hmm,
where each level has its own little really unique boss that has a unique way to fight it. Like it's not the same idea. I don't just need to blast it enough times. It's got a weak spot. I need to wait for that to light up, and then I need to shoot that. But they also have unique attack patterns and unique ways of moving, and I really enjoyed how diverse the boss crew was.
mm-hmm.
Even though sometimes, kind of getting back to your enemy design quibble, sometimes it didn't make a ton of sense. Like there's a fight near the end of Star Fox 64 where there's just kind of like this fleshy clay person running through space that you're shooting the skin off of effectively, and it's just like, what is even going on right now? But you fight your way through it. It's like a mini boss in the Andross fight, and you get to the other side and you move on.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's touch on the story. We talked a little bit about it with our crew of four main people in your squad. You got Peppy, Falco, Slippy, and Fox McCloud. And we also talked about Wolf. And part of the story is that Peppy, Fox McCloud's father, and Wolf were all in a squad together, who originally went after Andross, but then Wolf betrayed Peppy and Fox's father, such that now Wolf is on the enemy Andross
Mm-hmm.
side, and you've got this revenge story going on, which is interesting. But what other kind of parts of the story did you like in Star Fox 64?
I didn't always pay attention back when I would play it, and I didn't pay a lot of attention to it in some ways. But I will say, like, I do like the idea of them being kind of an independent crew, but that they're still, is it General Pepper? Is,
Yes, I believe General Pepper is kind of the dog like leader of the people you're trying to save, and you're a
yeah,
mercenary group brought in to save their planet and their star
yeah.
system.
So I like that there is that automatically makes it very expansive and fleshed out as like a full universe kind of thing. Is here's this guy in charge of an army, and they can defeat everything else except for Andross, and so they call on Fox to defeat Andross. So
Mhm.
um there's I know the other story elements is it is sort of, it makes Fox to be a diva in some ways. Like he's always the top guy. There's a lot that he will go and do that the others don't. There's always that kind of elements of everything, but
Yeah, it's a little bit like, you all go home. I'll take it from here.
mhm,
He's got the hero complex going on.
he does. And I didn't think about that as much as playing it again, and you bringing it up too. So there is, I feel like that element of the story too is like, oh, everything is pointing to Fox. This is, yeah, he's the crux of it all. So Yeah.
It's very much like the Luke Skywalker, I'm going to turn off my targeting computer and use my
Hmm.
special powers to make this one in a lifetime shot. And Fox has a little bit of that going on.
Yeah.
Definitely tons of Star Wars inspiration in this
Oh
game.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, the story overall is fairly generic. Enemies coming in, we got to save our allies. They hire us to be the heroes and risk our lives. Although one thing I really love at the end of Star Fox 64, maybe at the end of the other games too, is it'll give you a score, but it represents that score by having it be an invoice for enemies shot down and things like that to
Yeah.
General Pepper. And so you're just like, oh, that's right, we saved the world, but also it's time to get paid now.
Yeah.
Um, I think that the true charm of Star Fox's story comes from the interpersonal banter
Hmm.
between your squad mates. They all have very unique personalities, and we learn a little bit about them here and there. Falco's constantly talking about how Slippy's the screw up, and we always need to go save him. And Slippy has a heroic moment here and there, and also screws up, and we need to go save him. And Peppy is kind of the gray hair pilot who's been there, done that, and is almost like the father figure that stepped in for Fox's
Yeah.
lost father. And then Falco is the opposing enemy ace, or excuse me, the other allied ace. Kind of has like a Maverick and Iceman vibe going from Top Gun, where they're competing but also on the same team in a way. So I think it does a lot with telling the story of these four squad mates more so than it tells a big story about Andros versus the galaxy. But I really think it's enough to keep you engaged throughout
Yeah.
it.
They really fleshed out a lot to it
Hmm.
to make it a good cast of characters. I mean, and I think they're very memorable. Like I mean, even from the first one, I think. Well, I remember you and I would like repeat random things that the characters would say, both
Yeah, yeah,
from Star Fox, SNES, and 64, just because
right.
it was somehow so memorable to get through what they were
Uh,
saying. Yeah. So
yeah. How many times have we said the phrase "do a barrel roll"
yeah,
for absolutely
your
no
father helped
reason?
me like that. I think it's a lot of pepper. I think we had some Slippy stuff too, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like a lot of Slippy's lines are just "Fox"
Yeah.
and stuff like that.
Whoa. Yeah.
So any final thoughts? Are you ready to rate Star Fox 64?
Let's get into it. Yeah.
You want to go first or shall I?
Actually, I'll let you go first. I was almost
Okay.
going to take it, but I'm curious. Yeah.
Um, so I think this is probably one of my most memorable N64 games. There are some big highlights. Obviously GoldenEye was another big one, but this is the one that I think most fondly of, and I
Hmm.
really enjoyed my time revisiting it. I didn't give a ton of two thumbs up to our Nintendo Switch Online Expansion Pass Library Experience games. But I think I am going to go ahead and give Star Fox 64 a two thumbs up,
Oh,
putting it up there, maybe a hair or two behind Link to the Past and Earthbound, but still,
okay.
like, it's one of the better titles in this library.
Okay.
How about you?
Who I am trying to think now. Maybe in some ways how I will end up rating it. So I'm going to talk through it. This was one of the games. I'm with you that going back and playing it, and especially on the Nintendo Switch library online experience, whatever we're calling it, I it was it maybe wasn't quite living up to the nostalgia expectations that I had, but it was really fun to play. I did enjoy it. As frustrating as some of it was something that as I was playing it, I'm like, this is just a good kind of like pickup game. It and in some ways, I feel like it was for us when we first played it. That it was an easy game just to like get into, and it wasn't frustrating to like each time for starting over again. I remember when we were kids, it was not necessarily frustrating to keep doing that.
Mhm.
Um, to just jump in and be like, okay, here's the first level, here's the second level, cool. And I think it's the same thing. Like it just there's some level of fun to it that it just is it's just easy to jump into and play and go for. And I think it has a great job at having that kind of maybe a slightly timeless factor, I would dare say. So I think all that to say, I mean, I don't have anything big enough negative as I'm thinking through all this to go ahead and not give it two thumbs up. Also, that's I don't know what that's gonna do. We'll find out. I know we still got another rating part to see what we end up doing, but
So
um,
two thumbs up
I would give it two thumbs up.
for your rating.
Also,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So the next question is this worth playing? For anyone that has the online pass, does it age well? Is it still fun? Would you recommend it kind of generically to anyone?
So I feel like in ways we've been rating some of it too, or rating some of these games also of like, you know, is it worth grabbing the whole online expansion pass to play? And I've got to say, actually, no.
Okay.
Um, I I think it's like if you have it. Well, here's a hard thing, and this is going to sound like a contradiction, but it's like if you have the expansion pass, definitely play it. But I wouldn't grab the expansion pass just to play it.
Gotcha.
Um,
I
yeah.
think that's a fair. I'm gonna say yes, worth playing. More so like assuming you have the expansion pass.
Okay.
But I do think I don't like a lot of the times I've been saying it's worth playing because of some sort of historical
Mm-hmm.
addition that this is to the video game history books. I don't think Star Fox 64 has a big place in the video game history books, but it's pretty fun. I
Mm-hmm.
think it holds up well. Like the question, is it still fun all these years later? I think the answer is yes, especially if you're looking for a kind of challenging space shooter experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think overall I'm going to give it the yes. So let's give it the half point overall for worth playing. And then the nostalgia factors are next, or in our last area. Did it bring back fond memories? Did it live up to those memories as you were playing it? What do you think?
Ooh, in some ways this is tough. Like it did. Like as much as we're saying, I mean, all the lines, all the just the memories of the different routes you could take, like that was coming to mind.
Mhm.
Um, for actual like playability, it wasn't quite living up to that, unfortunately.
Mhm.
Because I'm with you. I played it a lot. I had just like there's a weird intuitiveness that I had with playing the original Star Fox or like playing it back on the original consoles that I didn't quite have with this, and so it felt different. Like I almost came at it in all more of what we were just saying in the last rating. It's just it's something fun to go to. Like it's a game that's worth playing, but it didn't quite get to that nostalginess that I wish it had for me.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So no go on the nostalgia
I would
factor for
say
you?
no,
Low?
actually.
Yeah.
But that's not, yeah, I mean, it's not, it's weird because it's like, I think it's still a great game. Like, the only things that were nostalgic for me were, it's like the sound.
Hmm.
Or I would say for the most part, it's the sound and the characters that were the big nostalgia factor for me. Yeah.
I I'm gonna go ahead and give it the my half of the point for the nostalgia factor because it really just hit right for me. I think it is partially, I played this game a ton. Chris played it a lot. I played it a ton, and so there was a degree of muscle memory that was being activated, a degree of fondness. Like it did take me back to childhood and to playing this over and over again. A little break from schoolwork. I'm gonna go play a round of Star Fox 64, do the path I really like to take, and win the game, save the universe, and just like it felt good to be back in that world. So let's give it the half point for
Okay.
nostalgia factor, giving Star Fox 64 an incredibly respectable 5 out of 6
Okay.
points. Well done, Star Fox 64. I think that puts it at number 3 of our um, full Nintendo Switch Online Expansion Pass Library Experience
Okay.
playthrough with let's see, or number 4 actually, tied for number 3. There we go.
Okay.
Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past got a 6 out of 6. Let's see,
That's what I
Earthbound
thought.
got a 5.5 out of 6, and then GoldenEye and Star Fox 64 got a 5 out of 6.
Okay.
Uh, Definite highlights from our last year of gaming. And speaking of highlights of gaming, let's pivot from talking about just Star Fox 64 to our entire kind of view of the Nintendo Switch
Yeah.
online expansion pass library
Okay.
experience. Um, what were some of the highlights from this last year for you?
I think it was those games that we just talked about. I was thinking through my GoldenEye experience as we were talking about the Star Fox 64. A Link to the Past. That is a huge highlight, still is, because it just lived up to the nostalgia. It lived up to being a great game overall. So that was wonderful to go back to and just see. Oh my gosh, this is such a great game overall.
Mm.
and and I think something like that I've been comparing. I mean, just other games to in general. Ever since. So weirdly, that's a highlight. I think to go to as far as like playing and experiencing everything. That was a big one. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely echo that for Link to the Past, but also a couple SNES titles that kind of were a new experience that I really loved was Harvest Moon. Even though I had a lot of quibbles about the decisions that they made making that game, just being able to kind of experience the origin of the cozy game felt very good, and I could see why it
Okay.
was beloved for so long. And Earthbound, a game that I've known I've needed to play since back
Hmm.
in the SNES days, and just never really got to it. And to finally get dive a good chunk into that game and realize why it was so special to people and how well it held up. That was also a big memorable part.
Hmm.
I got a couple more, but do you have any others highlights you want to talk about?
I was thinking of some of the small or like smaller ones, like ones that you and I played individually. I had some nice dives into ones that I had never played when they came out and got to experience, and was also at the same time glad that I never got into them. I mean, I was thinking of like Altered Beast. I know I didn't get a chance to talk about. I played Super Ghouls and Ghosts, Super Ghouls and Goblins.
I think it's
And
Goblins. I
I think it
forget.
is Goblins. But that was one like I always saw advertised. I think there was tons of like code things and stuff in Nintendo Powers, and playing it for the first time, it's a frustrating game. So it's like it's a weird. Again, it's like another weird highlight, but it's being able to play some of the games that I haven't gotten to ever play and realizing I didn't miss out on much. Mean Bean Machine, that was another that I'm like, what happened? Like, but and then at the same time, like some others that I played that were good nostalgia was like I did a little bit of Donkey Kong Country and Sonic Spinball and got into Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, which we never got, and that was actually a fun one too. So there were some like good fun ones that it's like we didn't ever own them, but I got to get into a little bit more, and that was really nice, and just to see like, oh yeah, if I might like to like pick these up again and play them, that kind of thing. So um, there were some highlights, but yeah, at the same time, it just helped justify some things in my childhood. Maybe not justify, any tantrums to try to buy some of these games, but at least justify I didn't actually miss out on anything. So yeah.
A couple other highlights for me was replaying the Game Boy Advance WarioWare game. I think that was the first WarioWare game,
Hmm.
and it was just as fun going back to it as it was originally. That is a wild series of games that
Yes.
uh, I think it started at its peak. I've heard it hasn't kept up as well in the later WarioWare games, but the WarioWare Twisted and WarioWare on the Game Boy Advance were just so much fun and still worth returning to. Uh, just just the strange prompts, like, pick it and it's like a giant nose and you need to get a booger out of it or
Yes.
something, and you have like 3 seconds to do so, and you have to figure it out and play it really fast. It's absolutely wonderful, and I played it over and over again until I finally beat the Game Boy Advance game again. And experiencing the original Legend of Zelda was fun. I probably played a few minutes of it back in the day, but kind of actually getting into it and learning a little bit about the history of Zelda was really fun. Um, I also found a new series of games that I really liked, which was the Puyo
Okay.
Puyo series,
Ah.
and also the Pokemon Puzzle League game, which was effectively a Pokemon version of a Puyo Puyo game. That was a big surprise of this long-running series that still existed today, and I had never experienced it. And I played like three different ones scattered throughout the this library, and that was a big surprise. And I am still keeping an eye out for more Puyo Puyo games to play in the future. Puzzle games. How about, are there any more game recommendations you'd have, that we didn't get to in this year-long adventure, but you'd be like, yeah, I have absolute confidence that you would enjoy these games.
I would say I touched on it a little bit. I would say the Donkey Kong Country games.
Hmm.
Those seem to hold up fairly well enough as like platformers. I think they're just fun. There's some traditional platform things with them, but it's like the way that they had certain elements within it. It just made it sort of set apart from some other games, some other platformers and stuff. And so, and the music's fun, sound effects are fun. Just even the graphics are a little bit fun, like an almost claymation look to them
Right.
was really great. And so I would say any of the Donkey Kong Country games are good to go to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think for people that enjoy platform games, this is a really impressive
Mm-hmm.
collection because not only do you have Donkey Kong Country, but you also have Kirby and Mario, and just a huge
Mm-hmm.
selection from those series
Yeah.
that can keep you engaged for a long time. And a lot of those platformers hold up pretty well.
Yeah.
The ones that I'm going to shout out are both Golden Sun 1 and 2, which was this really amazing, innovative, turn based RPG for the Game Boy Advance. Had an engaging storyline that was told
Hmm.
over a couple games. People are still hoping to see a sequel all these years later. And even the visual effects for the Game Boy Advance were really impressive and engaging. The way you could summon these impressive magical effects during combat, as well as the puzzle-based out of combat experience where you're using your powers in and out of combat. Sometimes to help
Ah.
you navigate and get a treasure chest, and other times to fight off the big bad monster.
Okay.
And also in RPG world, Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga is a game that I
Mm-hmm.
haven't played since back in the day, but I remember enjoying the Mario and Luigi RPGs and just the Mario RPGs in general. They're fun, they're silly, they have a funny, engaging storyline, and also they have these timing-based mini games in the turn-based combat that kind of kept you engaged in combat rather than just hitting A over and over again to beat up the mobs that you come across. You actually had to pay attention as you were playing, and I enjoyed that a lot about the Mario RPGs. Anything else that you want to shout out from the library?
No.
Okay. So now that we're on the backside, we've been playing this $50 expansion pass library package for a year. How do you feel the value proposition is? Like, is this money well spent that you'd encourage somebody else to do? Would you say just get the base package at $20 a year that doesn't have the Genesis, Game Boy Advance, and N64, or are you all in? Like, this is great.
Well, actually, here's a question. I think the music app? Is that with any of the online?
Either one
Either
gives you
one.
access to the Nintendo Music app.
Then I would say the base.
Mhm.
The base subscription is pretty worth it on its own, even though, gosh, we had GoldenEye and Star Fox 64 is like some of our highest rated. I would still say the base could
Mhm.
you could get by with that if you
I
were.
think the price difference is just so surprising. So you got the majority of the games on here are available for $20, Game Boy,
Mm-hmm.
Nintendo, and Super Nintendo.
Mm-hmm.
And then a $30 edition, more than doubling the price to add the Genesis, GBA, and N64.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't feel quite right to me. Like if the expansion pass were $30 a year, $10 a more instead, then I'd be like, oh, that's a no-brainer. You know, get those extra games, give yourself those options, because especially the the I personally wasn't a big fan of the Genesis library. However, I could see that's probably because we didn't have a Sega Genesis, so I didn't have the nostalgia for those games. But
Yeah.
there's some bangers in the GBA library. It's a pretty small library, but there's some
Yeah.
real good ones. Same with the
Yeah.
N64. A lot of people have some nostalgia for the N64, and even though the controllers were weird and they didn't translate perfectly well, some of them do hold up and are worth revisiting. But I'm not sure it's $30 a year worth more revisiting. Um, it's also not that expensive, so I don't know.
No, yeah, because that's for the full year price is what we're saying for
Yeah,
either one. But I would say the big thing is are the controls in some way because I wish that I actually wish so. This is the comment that I was saving. They really need to do a remapping element
yeah,
to it, which is
yeah,
really
yeah.
not hard to program in because it has more to do with the programming for the Nintendo Switch. Just all the programming things I know, because it's roughly like you can do that on a computer. Like you go
Right,
into preferences and you say I want to use this key on the keyboard instead of this key, and it's roughly the same thing really on the Nintendo Switch. And
I
I
would think
don't know
so.
why they didn't put that in to it
Right.
because that would have helped a ton.
Hmm.
And yeah, I don't know if it had to do too with like I mean now that I think about it, the way the controllers work because you can detach them and you can have other ones, but still I don't know. It's really not that hard of it's not that much extra to put in as a program thing. And
I agree.
they just didn't do it and they needed to, especially for the N64. They needed to. So, yeah.
I think the highlight of this entire library of games is the SNES titles, which is
Yeah.
available in the base $20 a year package.
Yeah.
While I did think that the GBA and N64
Yeah.
had some really good titles. I would just enjoy those SNES titles personally. And
And
then I don't think the Genesis or the Game Boy added a ton, and the original Nintendo library is fun more from a historical archive perspective rather than
mhm.
fun games to play today. But the SNES is just that's where a big chunk of the games are and the best games are.
Well, I think the other so one thing I will say actually there's a slight problem that I'll get to, but I will say I think I had a bigger fondness for the Genesis titles than you did for
Gotcha.
sure. But even that
Mhm.
library I felt like was slightly lacking in some ways.
It's fairly
It's
small.
yeah, it's like it's the Sonic games which are easily obtained elsewhere and I've played a lot of over time also. I know that one had, gosh, it was a Toe Jam and Earl, I think, and was it the Genesis one that was the original Earthworm Jim was on there too? Earthworm Jim 2 was on the Super Nintendo library.
Yeah, one
But
was on Genesis and one was on Super Nintendo. I
yeah,
forget which
like,
one was on which.
so there are some that it's like, gosh, those are actually worth going through in the Genesis part, but like that's about it. And so the library was lacking for that too, which is really too bad. Especially that I know like a lot of the Genesis titles are coming back in other ways, and maybe that's even the problem is that they're reselling them and repackaging them in other ways, and so it's like okay, you're gonna resell them in different skins. Gotcha.
Right.
The I
Yeah,
think
they might not be adding to this library because I
mhm,
know Sega is working on other packagings of
yeah,
their games to sell on like Steam and whatnot,
yeah.
or on
So
their own, maybe.
and I would say that's a little bit of the Nintendo problem too, because as I think of like the library for Nintendo, the online library you can only have so many in certain games because so many third parties have made games for all those systems, and so you're not running into some of the Capcom ones as much. Or like I know there was like a little bit of Mega Man, right? Am I
Yeah,
thinking
it's
of
like one
something?
through six, I think, on the Nintendo.
Yeah, and that's really all you could do because I think somehow they have that deal. But like a lot of Disney games, there's classic Disney games for the
Mm,
Nintendo that a lot of people have remembered very well, and even actually even for the Genesis, like Aladdin, and I think even Lion King. We played Lion King for Super Nintendo, but there's Lion King I think for Genesis also, and Aladdin was a huge Genesis
mm,
game. So there's like even this whole Disney game library, and it's like you're not going to get that on this online uh, expansion pass library, which is too bad. But I mean, that's some of the stuff that people remember playing. There's like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. There's like Turtles in Time. I remember playing. I think for SNES stuff like
mm.
that. You just can't get those for this online library, which is too bad. But I think that's where
Right.
it's hard for like what you're saying for the Nintendo library is yeah, it was hard for me to like pick some games out because they weren't bad games, but it's a little bit of a lackluster library. Like a lot of games, but not maybe not quite enough for like the ones that I really wanted to play are not
Right.
included. So
The gems in this library there's less gems than there are detritus.
mhm.
Just like, well, this is here to try, but no one's going to play that much of it because it wasn't that good.
Mhm.
I think at the end of this, looking at retro gaming as a whole, I enjoyed my time, especially the ones that I had a lot of nostalgia for. I discovered a few new titles that caught my
Mhm.
eye for the first time, but I think retro gaming is not as much for me is one of the things that I learned on this. I'm more looking forward to getting back to our kind of regularly scheduled um,
Yeah.
uh, podcast plan of spending a lot of time on one modern game, and actually getting to beat some games because I'm not playing so many. So I'm thinking maybe retro gaming isn't quite for me, but it was a fun time, fun way to spend a year and
Yeah.
live in some nostalgia. How are your feelings about retro gaming at the end of this?
I still enjoy retro gaming, but it feels more of like pickup games for me. Like almost as much, almost kind of like having game apps on my phone, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
Like they're good for just, oh, I have a little bit of time to kill. Let me find a game in this retro library and play through it for a little bit. And I think that shows too the games that we're wanting to play now, the more modern games, you know, I think we both know we would not have those games if it weren't for these games that are in the retro library. They're very much built on top of that. However, these new modern games have improved upon them a lot. And so I think
Mhm.
that's the hard thing is like they can have a huge expensive story because technology has advanced so much, and they've seen the pitfalls of the retro games and wanted to do something different. And so that's a big thing is we're looking at more limited storytelling in these retro games because that's all they could do. You really couldn't have a lot
Right.
because of technology and anything else. And so that's a big problem in some ways. And then yeah, sometimes game control suffered because you didn't have the technology, but they were big breakthrough games. And again, they're nice pickup games. Like I keep saying, it's spend you got a half hour, nothing to do, and you're waiting for something for that half hour. Like sure, play through Mario Brothers 2 and
Right.
play through as much as you can, that kind of thing. So it feels a lot more like a pickup game kind of thing than anything else. So
Nice.
yeah,
Well, that concludes our time with the Nintendo Switch Online Expansion Pass Library experience.
experience, adventure, world.
Again, coming up next is going to be a little bit of uncertainty. We're going to hopefully have a few Chrono Trigger recap pods to kind of keep the feed busy, and then we'll be back in anywhere from 1 to 3 or 4 months after the
Beautiful game.
baby situation kind
Yeah.
of settles down a little bit. This is our first kid. Um, and we'll be coming back at that time with our old style, playing a Nintendo Switch game we found on sale. And we are playing High Water, which is actually a prequel to Golf Club Nostalgia or Golf Club Wasteland, a game we covered way back when. This is not a golfing game. This is not another episode of Two Brothers Golf Game, but it is in that same world of Golf Club Nostalgia, or rather, in the world just before Golf Club Nostalgia came to be. So that's exciting. You can send questions to twobrothersplay-a-game@gmail.com. You can find us less and less, but occasionally at Two Brothers PAG on Twitter, and Chris is still on YouTube, I
Hmm.
believe.
We'll get back
And
into it also.
yes,
There's a little
yes,
bit of a break with that too, but
right.
yeah.
And if you want to help us out, you could review us on iTunes. That would help us a ton. Just put your thoughts down on iTunes for Two Brothers Play a Game. So, Chris, do you have any final thoughts you want to share after we've spent a year digging through this
Hmm.
absolute mountain of hundreds of Nintendo titles?
Well, it's that, to use that phrase, mountains are nice.
This is life.